churches gave themselves first to the Lord and then gave their possessions to those who were in need. Such an approach to responding to fragility of the world removes paternalistic attitudes that show up when those who are responding to needs become self-important because of their generosity. Solidarity and sharing must be informed by the truth that what we have is what we received from God, and therefore we can give it freely. This removes all forms of power games and manipulation that sometimes attend to diaconia. Solidarity and sharing do not, however, remove the responsibility and accountability in the use of resources. We have seen that in many cases. I will be off script for the last time. We have seen that there are many times when diaconia becomes a reckless way of use of resources, and churches refuse to be accountable in the use of resources. If we are serious in diaconal responsibility, we must also be serious in the stewardship of the resources that we use. The church's response to the needs of the world loses credibility if it is not based on accountability and stewardship. In taking the gifts of those who were in need in Jerusalem, Paul says we want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer these gifts. For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of God, but also in the eyes of people. The witness of the church is at stake in its contribution to resolving the pain of society. It must not only be accountable, but must also be seen to be accountable. I want to come to a close by raising some few challenges. For the church to meaningfully put its theology into practice, it must overcome some 3 challenges I want to highlight as I conclude. First, the church must overcome structural challenges. Today, diaconal response of the church to the various challenges in the world is a big challenge because of relationships between local actors and outside, or in what is normally called international actors. The relationship of these interventions tend to be characterized by asymmetry of resources, unequal access to resources. Local actors tend to have very limited resources, while so-called international development or diaconal actors tend to have many resources at their disposal. You know, yesterday in the evening when I was enjoying hospitality, I was inspired to realize that the tradition of the diaconate that is represented among many of you here is less oriented to this internationalization and this professionalization of diaconia that leaves the communities behind. I was inspired to see this because we have seen an evolution of diaconia where in its professionalization it has become totally disconnected to the life of the local church. During my time as General Secretary in Zimbabwe, I observed that foreign directors of international faith-based organizations driving diaconia would easily get funding from donor organizations. And this created a relationship of inferiority with local actors who felt that they could not meaningfully influence the fragilities at local level. It also meant that locals could not provide agency or leadership at local, resolving local problems. The agenda of intervention then gets dictated by outsiders who have resources. This fragility needs to be addressed if we are going to influence processes of diaconia that change the inequity in our work of diaconia. Fragility of the work of the world requires that locals be empowered with resources to implement interventions in a context-sensitive way. The second challenge is the urgency and leadership. Diaconia is a leadership issue. In many cases, diaconal actors, usually from the north, and here I'm still talking about this international diaconal work, sometimes tend to assume leadership at local levels because they have more resources, as I've mentioned above. They are normally assigned to work in other parts of the world, especially in the South, as country directors and such designated roles. Due to availability of such resources, we have seen in many times they come in, they park their Toyota Prado next to the bicycle of the local diaconal actor. And in such cases, the local diaconal actor is never taken very seriously because many people think that he or she cannot help them. If diaconia is about leadership or influence of the church to transform society, we then need to make sure that local leadership is cultivated so that it contributes to the lifting up of local communities. Church leadership has power to influence, local leadership has power to influence and foster a culture of care. Leaders who demonstrate and embody care and compassion in their teachings and actions will contribute to building caring communities capable of addressing fragility in different forms. This kind of leadership must be able to understand that local fragility is also a result of global processes. And that's why I'm so impressed with your organization, because you organize your diaconal relationship as the relationship of actors in Africa and in Europe. Because there is no way local actors can resolve local fragility without addressing some causes of fragility that are global. That's why solidarity in this diaconia is very important. Ecumenical diaconia must therefore be driven by local actors who realize that they've got solidarity at global level. The third and last response is that the church's response to fragility of the world requires participation of the whole church, even though some may take leadership and expert role. Contemporary diaconia, especially as it is driven by the international diaconal agencies I've talked about, tend to be institutionalized and professionalized outside the routines of the church. This model of diaconia presents some few people as diaconal actors operating from diaconal institutions that have different levels and in separation with the local church. In many cases, such separation creates a culture in which diaconia becomes more and more secularized. The diaconal ministry of the early church was connected to the worship life of the church. The church's response to fragility in the world was nurtured in an environment of preaching of the word, kerygma, in the worship of the church, liturgia, in the vitality of fellowship, koinonia, and in the witness to the world, martyria. Diaconia, from this spiritual ecosystem, will reproduce when diaconia is removed from this ecosystem of discipleship, of worship, of Christian fellowship, and of witness. When it's removed from this ecosystem, it starts to reproduce the power asymmetries that we see in the world, which are inconsistent with the faith of the church. In conclusion, let me say the world is struggling with so much fragility, as we have mentioned. Some of this fragility is social, is economic, is political, and is environmental. The diaconal response of the church to these fragilities should be based on its theological and biblical self-understanding of being a servant church. A church that is caring and compassionate for those in need. A church that is in solidarity. A church that seeks to transform the structures of injustice. A church that shares the resources it has. To do this effectively, the church must make sure it overcomes some structural inequalities characterized by the power asymmetries we have mentioned. Above all, the church's response to fragility in the world must be nurtured in an environment of worship, of preaching the risen Christ, of flourishing Christian fellowship, of bold witness of the coming kingdom of God. Such a church will contribute to giving hope to a fragile world and will hasten the coming reign of God, the reign of peace, justice, unity, and abundant life for all. Thank you very much.
I flippantly would want to say, preach it, brother, and that you are preaching to the converted. We all agree with what you have said, and we look forward to you saying it in other places. For we know that what diaconia means and how to do it well, but we look forward to you telling others. Sorry. So, Anita will now have a break from the translation, and we will have some questions and discussion around what Kenneth Mtata has said. So would you like to challenge us maybe with 2 questions to begin with?
Yes, I would just need to know what fragility everyone is seeing in their own context, and what theological resources they see from what we have discussed. What theological resources do they see could help in responding to such fragility? But before this, others may be having a question, so I don't want to stop others from asking questions.
We will have a short time of discussion, then questions.
Yes.
Ja.
Okay? So just where we are, if we can just have some discussion.
Okay. Wir haben jetzt einen kurzen Moment Zeit, dass wir sozusagen rudeln und mit unseren Nachbarn vielleicht ein wenig ins Gespräch kommen, Fragen zu entwickeln, die wir dann an Herrn Mtata richten können. Bis gleich.